All right. Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive. Today, we're tackling a book that might seem a little daunting at first glance. Leviticus. Not exactly light reading, right?
Yeah, it doesn't exactly top the bestseller list these days. Haha.
But stick with us.
Yeah.
Because honestly, Leviticus is way more interesting than people give it credit for. We're going beyond the usual, verse by verse
I'm
analysis.
going deeper.
And we're really going to try to uncover what this book tells us about the ancient Israelites, their culture, their beliefs, their whole worldview, really.
Yeah, their understanding of the
What
word.
made them tick.
Yep.
So to pick things off, maybe we could just start with the basics. What is Leviticus at its core?
I think at its heart, Leviticus is really a guidebook. It's like a manual for holiness, you could say, for
Right.
the Israelites, It's all about how to live a life that's pleasing to God, how to maintain that special relationship they believed they had with him.
Okay, so it's not just about like following a bunch of rules for the sake of following rules.
No, not at all. It's about a way of life. It's about understanding the divine, the sacred, and how to live in accordance with that.
That makes sense. But let's be honest, there are a lot of rules in Leviticus. I mean, some of them seem, well, a little strange to us today, like all those detailed instructions about sacrifices and purification rituals.
Yeah, that's true. But remember, we're talking about a completely different time and culture. The ancient world had a very different understanding of things like purity and impurity, sacred and profane, and sacrifice was a central part of many ancient religions, not just the Israelite tradition.
So the Israelites weren't unique in that way.
No, not at all. The idea of offering something precious to the gods was a pretty widespread practice. It was a way to appease them, to show your devotion, to ask for forgiveness or favor. But the Israelites, they had a very specific system, very elaborate.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating to try to unpack the meaning behind all those rituals.
So let's try to unpack some of them. What are some examples of these purity laws and sacrificial rituals that really stand out to you?
Oh, there are so many. But one that always comes to mind is the scapegoat ritual. They would literally take a goat, symbolically place all the sins of the community onto it, and then send it out into the wilderness.
Okay, whoa, hold on. They put all their sins onto a goat.
Yes, a very visual representation, right?
Right.
They believed this would purify the community, restore balance. It was a powerful symbol of atonement and starting anew.
Wow, I can see why that one would stick with people.
Yeah, it's pretty evocative.
Mhm.
And then you have all the dietary laws, the kosher laws, what you could eat, what you couldn't eat. That's a big part of Leviticus, too.
Yeah, the food rules.
Yeah,
Like no pork, no shellfish, that sort of thing, right?
exactly. And, there are lots of theories about why these specific foods were prohibited. Some scholars think it was symbolic, representing different categories of purity and impurity. Others believe it might have had a practical element, like preventing diseases that were common at the time.
Yeah, like food safety before they even knew what bacteria were.
Right, or it could have been a combination of both, practical and symbolic.
So maybe like a way to keep people healthy and also reinforce these ideas about holiness and living in right relationship with God.
Exactly. And I think it's important to remember that for the ancient Israelites, these weren't just random rules, they were deeply meaningful. They were woven into the fabric of their daily lives, their understanding of the world, their relationship with God.
Right. So it's like we can't really understand these rituals in isolation. We have to see them as part of a larger worldview.
Precisely. And it's a worldview that might seem very different from our own, but I think there's a lot we can learn from it about ritual, about symbolism, about the human desire to connect with something larger than ourselves.
Okay, so we've talked about the rituals, the sacrifices, the food laws,
Yeah.
but Leviticus isn't just about that, right? There's a whole other side to it. What about all the laws about social justice and ethical behavior?
Oh, absolutely. That's a huge part of Leviticus. It's not just about personal piety or ritual purity. It's also about how you treat other people, how you conduct yourself in society.
So it's like personal holiness is connected to how you treat your neighbor.
Exactly. And there are some really, I guess you could say, surprisingly progressive laws in Leviticus,
Yeah.
especially for their time. Like there are laws about leaving a portion of your harvest for the poor, about forgiving debts periodically.
Wow, that's pretty ahead of its time.
Yeah,
Like some people would say those ideas are still radical today.
I know. It's fascinating, right? These laws about protecting the vulnerable, ensuring fairness in business dealings, showing compassion to those in need. They really resonate with modern concepts of social justice and economic equality.
Yeah, it makes you think about how these ancient texts can still speak to us today, even on issues that feel very current.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the most exciting things about studying ancient texts. It can challenge us, make us question our assumptions, and inspire us to think differently about the world.
So if we were to write, like, a modern-day Leviticus, what would it look like? What values would we prioritize?
Ooh, that's a great question. What would a contemporary guidebook to holiness look like? I think it would have to address the issues of our time. Climate change, social inequality, the impact of technology on our lives. It would have to grapple with the big questions of meaning and morality in a world that's constantly changing.
Yeah. How do we live ethically in a globalized world? How do we care for the planet? How do we build a just and compassionate society? These are all questions that Leviticus, in its own way, was trying to grapple with.
Exactly. And I think engaging with those ancient texts can help us as we try to answer those questions for ourselves today.
So while it may seem like a dense ancient book of rules, Leviticus actually offers some surprisingly relevant and timeless lessons about how we live, relate to each other, and create a just and meaningful world. It challenges us to think deeply about our values, our actions, and our responsibility to both the divine and to each other.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into Leviticus. I hope this has inspired you to maybe take another look at this often overlooked book. There's a lot more to discover there.
Definitely.
Thanks for joining us,
Thanks for having me.
and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.